Introduce this piece of information that is in fact coming in for our viewers, where we'll give you a sense of what the current status of certain oil tankers really is. So we've got Nanda Devi, which is near the ports. We have also got Shivalik, which is near the ports, and we have another oil tanker, which is the Jag Ladki, I beg your pardon, which is currently on its way. Remember that Ladki was the one that was stuck in Fujairah. It was also struck by a drone strike, and fortunately everyone on board was safe, and now it's making its way to India. This is another LPG tanker that we have. Nanda Devi obviously made that successfully crossed that war-hit Strait of Hormuz, and we also have Nanda Devi, which is now in India. So about 92,712 tons of LPG has now been secured by the Indian authorities. Let me in fact also rope in Mr. Manan Dwivedi, who is a foreign affairs expert on this. Mr. Dwivedi, India has managed to do this through diplomatic channels. We have in fact managed to get our tankers to safely and securely cross that war-hit strait.
That if we, apart from the West Asian and the Middle Eastern war theater, if we go to the Ukrainian and the Russian war theater, then what we find, which is embedded something not in history, but in contemporary history or current history as we call it. So there we find that India managed a very, very difficult, clever and canny tightrope walk, which occurred with balancing out President Donald Trump and United States of America on one side of the fence, and Vladimir Putin, Uncle Vlad in Russia, in the Kremlin on the other side of the fence. The Americans really forced us. They were arm twisting us, wherein they were saying that if India buys its oil and if it gets its energy requirement from Russia, then they are going to be hit by an unprecedented pile-ups of what do you call tariffs, trade tariffs, and the import duties on the goods and services which would be rendered to America. But still, our Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Jaishankar Sahab, our external ministers, they have to be congratulated that we were able to meander through this morass of arm twisting and hegemonic attitude by President Donald Trump, and we were somehow able to please both the sides, that is America and Russia. And somehow, if you look at the energy basket also, India has been very prompt, unlike Pakistan, where Shehbaz Sharif has declared an emergency, and there's a lot of crisis and chaos as far as oil and LNG supplies in Pakistan are concerned, because they did not think for the future. They never do that. Because of that, their people, their hoi polloi, their commoners are in trouble. Coming back to India, we diversified our energy basket long time back, wherein roughly, I'm giving you the rough roundabout figure, around 44% of India's energy flows were increased, which were coming from Russia. Americans were also giving us 7.4 or something percentage of the total energy basket of India. And Venezuela, we are receiving around a minuscule, definitely a minuscule fund, a minuscule fraction of it, but 1.6% of our oil requirements from Venezuela. So we planned in advance, and we were hanky-dory with all the great powers. Specifically, we did the tightrope walk diplomacy, as it is called as, between Russia and America, and also we are doing it between America and Iran, due to which our crisis will be mitigated. But definitely it will be difficult for me to deny, because apart from my political and ideological buttressing, I have to look into the plight of the common people as a citizen of the country, where there is some slight brewing, not a great issue right now, but some slight brewing up crisis as far as cooking gas is concerned, and as far as the LNG supplies are concerned. Some restaurants in major cities have had closed around 3 to 4 days back, because there was a paucity, and there was the talk which was doing the rounds that only the personal personal usage of gas would be allowed to the households and families, while the commercial utility of cylinders is going to be very problematic for the entrepreneurs. This is one part of what I wanted to say. Secondly, coming back to Hormuz, I would say that Indian tanks have India has gone beyond that tanker war imagery or that tanker war scuffle where in the 1980s in the war between Iran and Iraq, there were tankers war wherein the Iranians were what do you call sinking the Iraqi and other countries what do you call tankers, oil tankers, and that led to and they were doing it vice versa. They both were harming each other's tankers, and finally UNSC had to come in between, which led to some sort of a rapprochement. So Strait of Hormuz, be it the Strait of Hormuz, be it the what do you call the Suez Canal, and you know that choke point between the Persian Gulf and the Oman. This has always been a rankling factor as far as the peace, stability, and you know the solidity of the maritime space and maritime trade is concerned. And this time around, this is not the first crisis because the Americans themselves they went on to reprimand in 1956 Suez Canal crisis. They reprimanded countries like Britain, France, and Israel who attacked Egypt in 1956, and India also took a stance wherein we were very much neutral, we were very much objective. But the Americans at that point of time acted as the global, not as super cop, but as a regulator nation, which they still talk about being. So, you know, I personally feel Strait of Hormuz, whether the Iranians blockade it or not, if you go through the prism of international law, then there's a conceptualization of what you call blockade. There's a conceptualization in the UNCLOS, that is the United Nations Convention on the Law of Seas, Part 3, wherein they talk about passage, innocent passage, wherein it is mentioned in the UNCLOS statute, Part 3, that there might be a kind of a volatility. There might be a military attack and decimation and a destruction of the enemy non-combatant ships also if the situation might lead to a seafaring military advantage to one of the enemy countries as part of the war. But I think because of the forward-looking, progressive, and I would use a negative word which is not pejorative in any sense, that cannily and cleverly and very surreptitiously, we have been able to get our oil without being capsized by any of the antagonistic actors in the Persian Gulf or let's say in the Strait of Hormuz, because it's a very important choke point. And I repeat that 20% of the world's oil supply, energy requirements pass through that. That amounts to 1/5 of the world's global need. And other countries also who used to need that kind of what do you call help of oil, or the trade in oil, like Indonesia and other countries, they too had taken very emergency measures to mitigate any kind of a blockade that might occur. And if Iran does a blockade of sorts, partially or unofficially, it is already a blockade, then it is a bland contravention of norm setting, rule of law, and all the the prescribed strictures and the customary international law, which is something which Iran should not do. But coming back to my old diatribe, I would just like to add that Iran cannot cry hoarse over America and Israel flouting international law, because their support to Hezbollah, they are actually complete propping up of Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in Yemen, the Kurdish tangle as Turkey and other countries along with Iran have created, not in these 2-3 countries, but in the entire land, that terrain of West Asia. All the blame for these ministrations, I'm using a word, ministrations, it actually goes all the way to Iran. So I think if they try anything tricky, anything problematic, it will have very adverse impact on the oil situation and the economic situation, not only in the region, but in the larger part of the globe, for which I have already been self-congratulatory, where I said India is beyond it, and definitely as the other respected colleague said, India has a balanced relationship, and this is just a new nomenclature that we are talking about. If you go back into history, during the Mughal rule also, there used to be a exchange of khilats, something which they called as khilats, or gifts of
Absolutely,
elephants and
Mr.